What if the problem with policing in America isn't a few bad cops, but a system that quietly protects corruption, rewards silence, and punishes accountability? What if the very structures meant to keep communities safe are also the ones making reform almost impossible? And what if real change won't come from slogans or outrage, but from understanding how corruption actually survives? Stay with me, because once you see how this system works, you'll never look at policing the same way again. While you are at it, please click like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and comment below. Policing in America is one of the most emotionally charged topics in modern society. For some people, police represent safety, order, and protection. For others, police represent fear, abuse, and injustice. Both experiences can be true at the same time. The reality is this: police corruption in the United States is not caused by a single factor, a single law, or a single group of people. It is the result of layered systems, deep-rooted culture, and human incentives that quietly shape behavior over decades. This video is not about attacking individual officers. It's not about demonizing people who risk their lives. And it's not about pretending every department is the same. This is about how corruption emerges, survives, and spreads inside institutions, even ones with good intentions. And as we move forward, you'll see why corruption doesn't require evil people, only weak accountability, silence, and incentives pointing in the wrong direction. Coming up next, we'll start with the foundation of the problem: systemic and organizational failures. Because without understanding those, nothing else makes sense. Corruption doesn't begin with bad decisions. It begins with systems that allow bad decisions to go unchallenged. In American policing, those systems exist at nearly every level. If there is one factor that sits at the center of police corruption, it is lack of accountability. In most professions, repeated misconduct leads to termination, loss of credentials, or legal consequences. In policing, accountability is often delayed, diluted, or avoided entirely. Internal affairs departments are frequently understaffed, underfunded, and structurally dependent on the same leadership they are supposed to investigate. Officers investigating other officers often work in the same buildings, attend the same social events, and rely on each other for safety in the field. This creates an obvious conflict of interest. Even when misconduct is proven, discipline can be minimal. Suspensions with pay, brief desk assignments, or transfers to another department are common outcomes. In many cases, officers who are fired are later reinstated through arbitration. This sends a powerful message, not just to corrupt officers, but to everyone watching. The message is simple: the risk of consequences is low. And when accountability is rare, corruption becomes rational. Coming up next, how legal protections and union power make accountability even harder. Police officers operate under legal protections that most professions do not have. Qualified immunity, in practice, often shields officers from civil lawsuits unless a court has already ruled that nearly identical conduct was unconstitutional. This creates an extremely high barrier for victims seeking justice. From the officer's perspective, this reduces personal risk. From the system's perspective, it reduces incentives to change behavior. Layered on top of this are powerful police unions that aggressively defend members, even in cases of clear misconduct. Union contracts often include provisions that limit interrogation timing, restrict access to disciplinary records, and erase past misconduct after a certain number of years. The result is a system where accountability is not just rare, it is actively resisted. And when systems defend individuals at all costs, culture adapts accordingly. Next, we'll look at how America's fragmented policing structure worsens the problem. The United States has nearly 18,000 separate law enforcement agencies. Each one sets its own standards for recruitment, training, discipline, and promotion. This means there is no single national baseline for ethics, education, or competence. Some departments require extensive psychological screening and long training periods. Others require only a few months of instruction before handing someone a badge and a gun. Inconsistent standards allow individuals who may be unfit for the role to enter policing, and sometimes re-enter it after misconduct elsewhere. Officers fired from one department are often hired by another with minimal scrutiny. This phenomenon, sometimes called wandering officers, allows corruption to migrate rather than be eliminated. And once these individuals enter departments with weak supervision, problems multiply. Up next, how money and incentives quietly reshape policing priorities. Many police departments rely on fines, fees, and asset forfeiture to fund their operations. On paper, this seems practical. In reality, it creates dangerous incentives. When budgets depend on ticket volume, arrests, or seizures, officers are subtly encouraged to prioritize revenue over justice. This shifts policing away from public safety and toward enforcement metrics. Over time, communities begin to feel targeted rather than protected. This fuels resentment, erodes trust, and reinforces an us versus them mentality inside departments. And when officers begin to see civilians primarily as sources of income or statistics, ethical lines blur. Coming next, how weak training and supervision normalize corruption. Many police departments provide limited ethics training beyond basic academy instruction. Once officers are in the field, supervision often becomes reactive rather than proactive. As long as complaints are low or paperwork is clean, behavior goes largely unchecked. This environment normalizes small ethical violations, accepting free meals, bending rules, overlooking misconduct by colleagues. These minor acts matter. They serve as the first step down a slope where corruption feels routine rather than shocking. And when leadership fails to intervene early, behavior escalates. Next, we'll shift from structure to mindset, the culture inside policing itself. So far, we've looked at systems. In the next part, we'll examine culture, specifically the police subculture, the blue wall of silence. Why loyalty often outweighs ethics. How silence becomes survival. And later, we'll explore psychological stress and entitlement, economic pressure and personal greed, why reform is so difficult, and what actually works when trying to reduce corruption. You can change laws. You can rewrite policies. You can introduce new oversight committees. But if the culture inside an institution stays the same, corruption adapts and survives. This is where many reform efforts fail. Because corruption in policing isn't just protected by systems. It's protected by identity, loyalty, and fear. To understand that, we need to look inside the culture officers are trained to live by every day. Police officers don't just work a job. They enter a closed social ecosystem. From the moment someone enters training, they are taught that the public does not understand them. The job is uniquely dangerous. Only other officers can be trusted. Mistakes can get you killed. Some of this is true. Policing is dangerous. But the psychological effect of this framing is powerful. It creates an identity where outsiders are viewed with suspicion. Criticism feels like betrayal. Loyalty becomes survival. Over time, this culture becomes self-reinforcing. Officers socialize together, date within the profession, rely on each other for safety. This makes dissent emotionally costly. And when corruption appears, silence becomes the safer option. Coming up, the unwritten rule that holds this culture together. The blue wall of silence isn't written anywhere. There's no official rule that says, don't report misconduct. But every officer understands it. Reporting a colleague is often seen as betraying the team, endangering lives, ending your career. Officers who break this silence frequently face retaliation, social isolation, denied backup, poor assignments, stalled promotions. In extreme cases, whistleblowers are pushed out entirely. This creates a chilling effect. Even officers who want to do the right thing quickly learn that honesty carries a price, and silence is rewarded. Corruption doesn't need everyone to participate. It only needs everyone to look away. Next, why stress and power amplify this dynamic. Police work exposes officers to violence, trauma, and human suffering on a regular basis. Over time, this leads to emotional numbing, cynicism, hypervigilance, burnout. Burned-out officers are more likely to cut corners, dehumanize civilians, react aggressively, justify unethical behavior. This is not because they start as bad people. It's because prolonged stress without adequate support rewires how people respond to the world. And when departments lack mental health resources, officers self-medicate with authority. Which brings us to entitlement. Many officers begin to believe that they sacrifice more than civilians. They aren't paid enough for the risk. The public is ungrateful. Rules don't account for reality. This mindset creates moral shortcuts. If you feel underpaid, taking small, perks feels justified. If you feel unappreciated, abusing discretion feels earned. If you believe the system is unfair, breaking rules feels reasonable. Corruption often starts as self-rationalization. I deserve this. They had it coming. This is how things really work. Next, when economic pressure turns justification into action. Not all departments pay well. In some regions, officers earn modest salaries while being granted significant authority. This combination, low pay plus high power, is historically one of the strongest predictors of corruption. Some officers face debt, family pressure, cost of living stress. In these environments, illicit income can become tempting. But here's the critical point. Low pay does not cause corruption by itself. Many well-paid officers are corrupt. Many poorly paid officers are ethical. Economic pressure becomes dangerous only when paired with weak accountability, cultural silence, opportunity, which brings us to personal greed. No system can eliminate individual greed entirely. Some officers exploit their positions simply because they can. They take bribes. They protect criminal networks. They abuse power for personal gain. But here's what's important. Systems determine whether greed is punished or rewarded. In strong systems, greed is risky. In weak systems, greed is profitable. And in American policing, too often, the risk is low and the rewards are high. Coming next, why reform efforts struggle and often fail. Reform threatens union power, political alliances, departmental autonomy, institutional reputation. Every layer has an incentive to resist change. Politicians fear backlash. Departments fear lawsuits. Unions fear loss of control. Officers fear exposure. So reforms are watered down. Body cameras without enforcement. Training without accountability. Policies without consequences. Change looks real, but behavior stays the same. Up next, what actually works when reducing corruption. In the next part, we'll explore what real accountability looks like, why independent oversight matters, how recruitment and training can prevent corruption, and why cultural change is harder, but possible. We'll also confront a hard truth. You cannot fix policing without changing incentives. By now, one thing should be clear. Police corruption doesn't survive because no one notices it. It survives because systems adapt to protect themselves. That's why so many reforms sound promising, and then quietly disappear without changing behavior. In this section, we're going to separate symbolic reform from structural reform, because only one of them actually works. And the difference matters more than most people realize. Symbolic reforms are actions that create the appearance of accountability without altering power structures. They often include new mission statements, additional training seminars, body cameras without enforcement, internal review panels with no authority, public apologies without consequences. These reforms calm public outrage while leaving the system intact. Body cameras are a perfect example. When first introduced, they were promoted as transparency tools. But without strict policies, independent access to footage, and real consequences for violations, cameras often become just another layer of bureaucracy. Footage disappears. Cameras are turned off. Policies are ignored. And nothing changes. The problem isn't technology, it's who controls it. Coming up, why internal investigations almost always fail. Most police misconduct is investigated internally. This creates three major problems. First, investigators are often former officers who share the same culture and loyalties as those they investigate. Second, departments fear legal liability and public backlash, which incentivizes minimizing findings. Third, officers know the system, how to delay, how to appeal, how to exploit procedural loopholes. This leads to a pattern where complaints are dismissed, discipline is reduced, serious cases take years to resolve. From the public's perspective, this looks like cover-ups. From inside the department, it feels like survival. But both perspectives lead to the same outcome, eroded trust. Next, what happens when accountability is external instead? The most effective anti-corruption systems remove investigation power from the institution being investigated. Independent oversight works because investigators have no career ties to the department. Political pressure is reduced. Transparency is increased. Outcomes are harder to manipulate. Civilian review boards with subpoena power, independent prosecutors for police misconduct, and external auditors all shift incentives. Suddenly, Misconduct carries real risk. And when risk increases, behavior changes. But oversight alone isn't enough. Because corruption often starts before someone ever puts on a uniform. Coming up, the importance of recruitment and screening. One of the most overlooked factors in policing is who gets hired. Inconsistent standards allow individuals with aggression issues, poor impulse control, rigid worldviews, history of misconduct, to enter policing. Effective recruitment focuses on psychological screening, background checks across jurisdictions, emotional intelligence, decision-making under stress. Departments that prioritize these traits experience fewer misconduct incidents over time. This isn't about lowering standards. It's about raising the right standards. Next, why training often fails to change behavior. Ethics training is common in policing, but training alone doesn't work unless it's reinforced by clear consequences, consistent enforcement, leadership modeling. If officers see unethical behavior go unpunished, training becomes meaningless. Worse, it becomes performative. Real training is paired with active supervision, immediate correction, transparent discipline, which brings us to leadership. Culture flows downward. If leadership tolerates misconduct, officers notice. If leadership protects certain individuals, officers learn who is untouchable. If leadership values arrest numbers over judgment, behavior follows. Strong leadership does three things: sets clear ethical expectations, applies rules consistently, protects whistleblowers. Weak leadership prioritizes image over integrity. And image-based leadership always fails in the long run. Up next, how incentives shape everything. People respond to incentives, whether they admit it or not. When promotions are tied to arrest numbers, ticket volume, asset seizures, officers chase numbers. When discipline is rare, risk-taking increases, ethics decline. When honesty is punished, silence spreads. The solution isn't moral lectures, it's changing incentives. Reward, de-escalation, community trust, ethical decision-making. Penalize, dishonesty, retaliation, pattern misconduct. Culture follows incentives every time. Coming next, rebuilding trust after it's broken. Trust isn't restored through slogans. It's restored through transparency, accountability, consistency. Communities don't expect perfection. They expect fairness. When misconduct is acknowledged and addressed openly, trust slowly returns. When it's denied, minimized, or hidden, trust collapses. This isn't just a moral issue. It's a public safety issue. Communities that trust police cooperate more. Communities that fear police withdraw. And isolation fuels more corruption. Next, the final section. In the final part, we'll bring everything together. Why corruption persists. Why easy answers fail. What meaningful reform actually requires. And the uncomfortable truth about responsibility. Because policing doesn't exist in isolation. It reflects the society that builds it. By now, we've examined the systems, the culture, the psychology, and the incentives that allow corruption in American policing to persist. And one uncomfortable truth should be emerging. Police corruption is not an accident. It is not a glitch. It is not the result of a few bad individuals slipping through the cracks. It is a predictable outcome of how the system is designed. To understand why reform is so difficult and why meaningful change is so rare, we have to confront the bigger picture. Because policing doesn't exist in isolation. It reflects the values, priorities, and contradictions of the society that created it. One of the most common ways corruption is explained is through the bad apple narrative. The idea is simple. Most officers are good. A few bad ones cause problems. Remove the bad ones, and the system works. This framing is comforting. It allows institutions to avoid self-examination. It allows the public to believe the problem is small. It allows leaders to promise reform without changing structure. But it's also misleading. In reality, corruption spreads not because of bad apples, but because of bad barrels. When systems reward silence, protect misconduct, and punish whistleblowers, even well-intentioned individuals are forced to adapt. Not everyone becomes corrupt, but many become compliant. And compliance is enough to keep corruption alive. A crucial question is often asked. If most officers are good, why don't they stop the bad ones? The answer isn't cowardice. It's consequence. Speaking out often means losing trust within the department, being labeled unreliable, facing retaliation, sacrificing career advancement, risking personal safety. When the cost of honesty is higher than the cost of silence, silence wins. This doesn't excuse inaction, but it explains it. And explanations matter if solutions are going to work. Policing is deeply political, not in party terms, but in function. Police enforce laws created by politicians. They protect property structures. They manage social conflict. This places police departments in a difficult position. On one hand, they are asked to maintain order. On the other, they are often underfunded, overburdened, and politically shielded from scrutiny. When police become tools for managing social problems, poverty, addiction, homelessness, corruption risk increases. Why? Because enforcement replaces solutions. And enforcement without support leads to abuse. Society plays a role in sustaining corrupt systems, often unintentionally. The public demands safety without inconvenience, order without cost, enforcement without accountability. At the same time, many people distance themselves from policing until something goes wrong. This creates a cycle. Fear leads to expanded authority. Authority without oversight leads to abuse. Abuse leads to outrage. Outrage fades without structural change. And the cycle repeats. Real reform requires sustained attention, not just reaction. Reforming policing feels threatening because it challenges deeply held beliefs. That authority equals safety. That force solves social problems. That order requires dominance. For some, accountability feels like weakness. For others, it feels like instability. But accountability is not anti-police. It is pro-legitimacy. Institutions that cannot correct themselves eventually lose public trust. And once that trust is gone, it is extremely difficult to rebuild. Real reform is not a single policy. It is a sustained shift in priorities. It requires independent oversight with real power, transparent discipline, national standards for training and conduct, protection for whistleblowers, reduced reliance on policing for social issues, incentives that reward ethics, not aggression. Most importantly, it requires honesty. Honesty about what policing can and cannot solve. Honesty about power. Honesty about responsibility. Police corruption is not inevitable. It persists because it is tolerated. And tolerance is a choice. Every system reflects what it is willing to accept. When corruption is treated as an unfortunate side effect, it grows. When it is treated as a structural failure, it can be addressed. The future of policing will not be decided by slogans or outrage. It will be decided by whether societies are willing to demand accountability, accept complexity, and commit to long-term reform. Police corruption isn't just about policing. It's about how power is managed, protected, and challenged. It's about whether institutions exist to serve the public or to shield themselves. So the real question isn't, why are some police officers corrupt? The real question is, what kind of system are we willing to build? And what are we willing to tolerate to keep it? That answer will shape the future of policing far more than any single reform ever could. Don't forget to subscribe on your way out. See you next video.